Hi, my name is Candace Milburn, and I'm a liaison specialist with the Veterans History Project. Today, I have the honor and privilege to interview Dr. James Joseph Williams. Today is Tuesday, May 27, 2025, and this interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. We are currently in the alcove studio space overlooking the main reading room in the Jefferson Building. Dr. Williams, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's jump right into these questions. Where were you born?
I was born in East Cleveland, Ohio.
Could you tell me a little bit about your parents and their occupations?
Sure. So my parents were teenagers. First love for my mom. She had me when I was 16 years of age and my dad was 17. And as you can imagine, being young teenage parents with 4 children, emergence in the 70s, so it was a pretty tough time growing up with mom being a single parent, but she was able to persevere, and here I am today. I'm one of 4. I'm a firstborn. I have 1 brother and 2 sisters.
Are any of them serving, or have they served in the military?
You know, it's very interesting being the first of many things, but no one in my immediate family has served in the military.
So how did they feel when they found out that you wanted to get into the military? And what were their feelings or thoughts?
Well, as it happens, the first feeling was me leaving Ohio. I initially attended college 2 years outside of my location in Cleveland, Ohio. And then I transferred and moved here to Washington, D.C. in August of 1985. It was 1985, and I drove a 1979 Chevy Chevette. So as I pulled out of the driveway was very wet with tears from my 2 sisters and my mom. However, my brother was like, "Go ahead, Junior, you'll be just fine, you'll be strong." And so off to Howard University I went. As it happens, as a transfer student, my funds had depleted because at that time I was a journalism major at Howard University. And because my funds had depleted, I had to withdraw from the university. And so there I was, roaming through the streets of Washington, D.C., working. And as it happens, there was a sign that overlooked my head. It was a billboard saying, "I want you." And of course, we know it's our favorite uncle, Uncle Sam. And so there I was, recruited as an Army reservist. And so I signed up on September 1988.
So how did you get to your initial point of entry?
So I went to the MEP station out of Baltimore, signed in. I was concerned that I may not have made an entry because I have flat feet. But I kind of heightened my toes just a tad bit, and that was enough to get me in. And so I attended basic training. My ASVAB scores, which is the battery of tests that you take to determine what your classification and skills were high enough that I could choose any skill that I wanted. As it happens, I was determined to go back to school because that's what I moved to Howard University for. And so even though I had a plethora of different occupations, I chose admin because it was the path of least resistance. It was a short span of 8 weeks training, and that would allow me to come back in the fall and go back to school. So 8 weeks at Fort Jackson, basic training, and then an additional 8 weeks of training at the same location, Fort Jackson, South Carolina, for my administrative training.
Did you get any degrees or master's degree, bachelor's degrees?
Very good question. So as a transfer student going to Howard, I had already had college credits of about 60 credit hours. So instead of coming in as a PV1 or private, I came in as an E3 because I had college credits already. Equivalent to an associate's degree, but I didn't quite have that. I was able to return from the training. However, I still did not finish at Howard. But in the end, having joined, I did earn my bachelor's degree in a completely different field. And with a 31-year career, I was able to also obtain my master's and my PhD.
Excellent, excellent. What was the best part of training or school that you want to share?
Well, I should mention that I was 24 years of age when I joined. And most kids that I had been to basic training with were 18, 17 years old, never left home. I had already left the nest at 17 early on. And so what I found was that I was in pretty good shape. I was outrunning those young kids and I wound up being some of their mentors because I was an older soldier at 24 years old. So some of the best things were to mentor some of the folks had never seen a face like mine, quite frankly, living in small towns across the country. And we wound up being pretty good comrades at the end of our training because we had to rely on each other. Wasn't fun having to suffer for some of the, improprieties that others had done, but we all learned teamwork, and that was able to get through our training. So that was some of the best parts. The fun runs, the marches, the road marches, living outside during our training, that was fun too for me.
Nice. Does any particular instructor stand out to you, and if there's a reason why?
There were two. One happens to have been the name of Sergeant Avant, A-V-E-N-T. He always seemed to have picked with me, and I realized that he was just a year older than me. And maybe he felt a little threatened because, I came in pretty confident, and him being a drill sergeant, he kind of sized me up. And, I wasn't intimidated by him at all. And then at the end, he's like, you know what, Private PFC Williams, you all right. The other person happened to have been a drill sergeant female from Washington, D.C., and she knew that I lived here. She too was a problem, picking on me all the time because I was from the area. And in the end, they both wound up giving me my salute when I finished the training. But yeah, those two come to mind. They were grilling me the whole time.
What was your first assignment after you got out of basic training?
Great question. So because I was a reservist, I came back to the DMV area, and my first assignment was at Walter Reed Army Hospital. But ironically, I was not a medic. I was an administrative specialist. So I basically did enlistment contracts, administrative work, some computer work. But my main focus was whenever reservists would come in, having signed up for the military, I was the first face that they saw. I signed them up for their enlistment bonuses. I explained to them about the insurance, sort of like HR, basically is what it was. Explained to them about their contracts, the benefits that they received. I would have anywhere from a class of 25 people per drill weekend and as many as about 150 coming in having signed up. So it was a lot of pressure, and I was only an E4 at the time. And apparently I did so well that I got promoted to E5 and wound up being the NCOIC, the NCO in charge of that. Now, as a reservist, I spent 10 years at that same location, and I realized there was more in me and I wanted to do something different. And so I got into a different career path after that.
Excellent. And after that, I'm sure it was many, many more promotions that came.
Well, interestingly enough, I only made it to E5 as an enlistment, but as it happened, someone told me about the Warrant Officer program. Never heard of it. I had a supervisor who was very, not very supportive, I should say. And so I wound up submitting a packet, absence of them knowing, and submitted my packet for the Warrant Officer program. I got accepted. And at the end of the day, he wound up having to call me sir because I was a Warrant Officer candidate, which means I was an officer. And I wound up leaving the 2290th U.S. Army Hospital in Washington, D.C., and headed toward Norfolk, Virginia. My first joint assignment where I was with a plethora of branches of service, including Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, as a WO1. And that's when my career really took off.
Okay,
that's
so
where the assignments took off.
Okay, tell us about those.
So I went to WOC school, WOC, which is Warrant Officer Candidate. Very, very psychologically challenging. You had to have great mental fortitude, physically demanding. Fort Rucker, Alabama, now called Fort Novasol, Alabama. 6 weeks. Same type of training as basic training, except it's at a different level as an Army Warrant Officer. Completed that training, went back to Norfolk, and I was their S1 shop, which is the Human Resources Personnel Specialist or Warrant Officer Technician. Great assignment. Had to learn all of the branches of service, not just Army. Had to know who to salute if they were Navy versus who was Marines versus who was Coast Guard. We had all the branches of service. And that gave me a leg up on the military as a whole because I was at a higher headquarters in Norfolk, Virginia. Stayed there for 10 years. As you know, 9/11 happened, and that was my first deployment. So I deployed from the DMV to Norfolk, Virginia for those 2 years, from the 8th of December 2001 until the 8th of December 2003. And 4 days after that is when I married my wonderful wife that year, 2003.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Did you see any combat, or did you play in a combat service support role at all?
Great question. It was combat service support. And as a new career, I was a cyber guy. They saw that I was smart, at least they thought so. And so they had me stay in the rear and create what's called the NOSC. If you're familiar with the film by Will Smith, Enemy of the State, where they had all the operational nodes and screens, that's kind of what I did. It was very new at the time because of what had happened here in our country with the Empire State Buildings and the Twin Towers in New York City and the Pentagon, respectively. And that created my career in the security cyberspace field, and I never looked back. So I was combat support. So I was the person that did the behind the scenes to bring the soldiers home, provided them comms, in addition to my admin work, but pretty much I was operational.
And how did that experience affect you in any way? Being behind the scenes, seeing everything from behind, how did it make you feel?
You had to have a high level of maturity. These are high pressure positions. You had to have emotional intelligence. You're reporting to colonels, 1 stars, 2 stars. You're briefing them every day and night on the impact that the mission would have. People's lives were in danger. Many of family members have actually lost their family members. I would often have to go and comfort some of those family members and explain to them that, I'm sorry, but, situation at hand that took place. That wasn't fun at all. And it made me feel more blessed that here I am, fully able, although mentally exhausted, but I'm still here. So it was really a pleasure to be able to give back that service to them.
Yeah. Thank you. What kind of friendships did you form, or if any, while you served?
Well, interestingly, I was the only warrant officer at this post. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, I was the only guy. So unfortunately, I became popular by default. I would have a lot of the different branches of service come up to say, we never seen someone like you before, by rank, because warrant officers are considered unicorns. They're very technical and tactical experts. So to see a warrant officer, many people know, many service members know that they are really experts in their field. And I did the very best job that I could. I would say it was lonely in the sense that I didn't have other warrant officers to associate with. But between being enlisted and having also officers in my corner, I felt pretty safe with the company that I kept. Did that for 10 years. And then it was finally time for me to relocate to a different path because I wanted to get all the way up to the rank of CW5, which is the highest rank you can achieve in the warrant officer cohort. And as it happened, that started another journey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we move on to that, I wanted to know, or if you could just talk a little bit about how you stayed in touch with family back home while you're going, you're doing all of this. Did you write letters? Did you phone? How did you do it?
Well, because most of my assignments were stateside, in Norfolk, Virginia in particular is where I was stationed, but I still had my home base here. I was single at the time during those periods after 9/11 until 2003. And so during the wartime, in this case, Operation Enduring Freedom, it was challenging because I'm originally from Ohio. And so family members, I would often write them, email them, contact them, let them know I'm okay. Unfortunately, I did suffer a loss from my aunt. And because I had served, I wasn't able to attend her homegoing, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I think she knows that this was a sacrifice that I made, and I think she would still be proud. But certainly the family was there to represent. Yeah.
Good to hear. What did you do for recreation when you were on duty? Any type of fun things you got into?
So I am known as the karaoke king. So as a stress reliever, I often sang karaoke, different songs, different genres. It was a stress reliever for such a high pressure environments that I was working in. even throughout my training as a warrant officer, when I went to warrant officer basic training in South Carolina or warrant officer advanced course at Fort Rucker, Alabama, at the end of our schedule, we'd head off to the local pub there and hand me a mic and off and ready to go to get people soldiered up, and they'd come back the next day and tell the instructors, did you know Chief Warrant Officer can sing? He was like, wow, he could sing. And so they would come out the following evening and witness me sing various songs, various requests. So
Awesome.
that's what I'm known for.
Do you have a favorite one that you always like to sing?
Yes. It's a group by the Whispers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Whispers and Ribbon in the Sky by Stevie Wonder, some Luther,
Okay.
but mostly the Whispers is my favorite group.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Off camera, we're gonna have to hear that voice.
I'll send you a video.
All right. Were there any humorous or unusual events that took place that stands out in your mind about your service time at all?
Oh man, there's so many. I'm trying to think of one that comes to mind. I can't think of one in particular. I was often asked to, because a lot of folks thought I was a preacher and thought I had, announcer voice, even though that was my major at Howard University was journalism. So I was often called to speak at retirement ceremonies, promotion ceremonies, and things of that nature. And I recall one particular ceremony in which the person was being promoted to colonel. And I gave him an extra rank and said, General so-and-so, let's give a hand for General so-and-so. And everyone clapped and laughed. I said, I was just testing you guys. I was pretty quick on my feet in recovery too. And so, yeah, that's one funny moment. And that was at my other assignment, which we haven't talked about yet.
Okay. Was there anything you did as far as inspirational or anything like that that gets you through the times or tough times?
Well, I'm a man of faith. You certainly go through obstacles that you don't expect to go through. But I also knew that I signed up for this. And even though a lot of times people that you love don't understand when you have to leave, it's bigger than yourself. And as members of your family, they would hope that someone's that you're taking care of, that you're showing the love for your countrymen, that they're also part of that countrymen as well. But I always say faith, family, and certainly your mental health is very important as well. And so when I would lay those factors out to them, I had hoped, now that I'm retired, that they understood that the sacrifice was worth it, because many of those family members aren't here. A lot of those service members are gone, but not forgotten. And so I put that in perspective, and hopefully that helps them out.
That's good. So let's jump back into your military service. So what's next?
Well, I've written a couple of books. The first one was called Chasing the Eagle from Dreaming to Achieving Success and Freedom.
Okay.
That book chronicles my life growing up in dire poverty. Mom was a single parent of 4 kids. We grew up on public assistance or had a public education, and now I'm providing public service in the form of military and in the form of, helping my fellow man or woman, whoever needs to hear my voice and inspire them. And so that book became an award winner, 8 book awards, 2 international book awards. And that introduced me to the second book, which was called Mission Unstoppable, Failure's Blessings. I co-authored that with 31 additional leaders, and that chronicled my journey through 9/11, coming back home from my service, being offered a job, had the full clearance and so forth, and that job only lasted 90 days because I was unaware of what types of questions to ask when you're searching for a job after the military. Things like, how long is the contract? I wasn't aware that the contract was only good for 90 days. My wife and I were just married. We were building our dream home. My son was being born. And so I had to come back home and drive home, and that was the longest drive home. And she's happy, rubbing her stomach, 5 months pregnant with our son. And I said, sweetie, I don't have a job. But the good news is I had a very good skill set in cybersecurity, and within 2 weeks, I was able to get a job, and I've never looked back, made multiple six-figure income, was able to do a dual career, and it's been a great journey. So for anyone listening, if you have a good skill set in the military, make sure it's transferable so that when you get out, I mean, let's not kid ourselves, they're not driving Humvees around the Beltway anymore. You really need a skill that's going to sustain you both in and out of uniform. And fortunately, that was what happened to me. So we're still in our home 21 years later, and God is good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let me back up a second because I think I skipped over. I wanted to talk about the end of your service, like what happened towards the end and how was that for you, how it ended.
So we need to talk about my third assignment going into that third leg of my career. Having left Norfolk, I had two opportunities. One was to go to South Korea as a reservist, an IMA reservist, which means you can do all of your drills at one time, including your 2 weeks, or Hawaii. Well, I looked over to my wife, and she practically gave me the pen and says, "You know which one you're choosing." So in the end, we wound up living in Hawaii for 4 years. I was stationed at United States PACOM, which is near Camp Smith, Hawaii, which is a Marine base. But it too is a joint headquarters with Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines. And that's when I got my first international mission. The first one was to South Korea. I wound up going there anyway for Terminal Fury. It was an exercise to help with worldwide exercises from people coming all over the world to do these exercises. And the second one was the Armed Forces Philippines. That was my next international experience. That didn't happen until I got to Hawaii. And so that was probably my best assignment for about 8 years. Then my final number came, and that number being CW5. That brought me back to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, back to the DMV, and no sooner I got back and got promoted to Chief Warrant Officer 5, the boss says, "Hey, I got an assignment for you. I would like for you to be on a small team of about a dozen people. You're going to be an assistant inspector general. You're going to travel across all of the Army bases because right now the morale is below sea level. A lot of soldiers are complaining that they don't feel valued, they don't feel heard, they are getting out, they feel abused by the commanders. And so our job was to go to these installations, talk to them one-on-ones, much like we're talking here, gather the data, do the statistical analysis, and report it to a 3-star inspector general at the Pentagon. 6-month assignment, very mentally exhausting, but rewarding because they felt heard when they talked with us. That was after being pinned CW5. And then finally, the most challenging assignment, which ended my career, and that was at the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. If you recall, Hurricane Maria, Irma, and I'm getting them confused, it was the 3 most impactful domestic hurricanes that took place where Florida was impacted, Texas, Puerto Rico. My last assignment was as a battle captain, the sole battle captain on a 12-hour shift. It was so exhausting that I would often come home and I would ask the family to just give me about an hour to decompress. I would go into my man cave and just relax. And then I'd come up and say, "Guys, how was your day?" It was that exhausting. They will never know how exhausting that was. 6 to 6, and then 6 to 6 again. Yeah, for 2 years. Again, reporting to a big jock, much like I described in The Enemy of the State with Will Smith. Much more impactful because this was domestic. Reporting to a 3-star. Anything that I told them had them to make a decision. As a CW5, this is highest rank in the Warrant Officer Corps, but I'm talking to 3- and 4-star generals about the impact of these logistical waterways that was happening. So that was a lot of pressure. Yeah.
So that was your last and final assignment.
Yes.
So how were you received once you finished the end of your service? How were you received by your family and your community when you finally came back home?
I think it was mixed because I don't think they expected me to sort of end the career, but I knew it was time. First of all, my son was going into high school, and I said, after these many years of serving, I wanted to give him, my 4 years to see him through high school, and now he's a second-year student at Temple University. Very proud of him. But also, my wife and I hadn't had much time to do cruises and the things that we wanted to do. They've been in my corner for the better part of all my career, and so I'm enjoying this time better. And I think 31 years is a remarkable career beyond just the 20 years.
Definitely.
And so I think I left my mark, an indelible mark on the military and society at large. Yeah.
Were you able to use the GI Bill at all to support your education?
Yes, absolutely. That allowed me to get my master's degree and then further my PhD. And I made sure that before I retired that I was Dr. James Williams, and then retired as a CW5. So I have my plaque in my home office that says Dr. James J. Williams, CW5, U.S. Army retired. So
awesome.
I left the way I wanted to.
Definitely, you definitely did. How do you think the service changed you? Do you feel like you changed in any way from the time you got in to the time you got out?
That's a very good question. I feel that my upbringing sort of raised me early. Being the oldest of 4, I was already a man at like 10 years old, helping to rear my siblings while mom was, struggling being a single parent. So those value systems were already in me. But I think joining the military sort of enhanced the goals that I already set for myself. And if I'm being candid, I really joined the military out of necessity. I wanted to finish what I moved here to do, and that was to get my education. And I guess I exceeded my expectations because what started out was a bachelor's, and now I'm Dr. Williamson. Who would have thought? I think the community, to answer your question at home, they're very proud of me because this wasn't even a conversation at home growing up.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have scholars in my family at all, so being the first has its challenges. But I think also it probably hopes to incentivize those at home that, hey, if I can do it, I didn't go to boarding school, you can do it too.
Yeah. Did you continue any of those friendships after the service time? Did you stay connected with anybody that you were close with?
It's interesting because it's probably every 1 to 5 years with my warrant officer cohorts. I'm a professed self-proclaimed introvert, but having served 31 years, I poured out so much service to everyone else that by the time I retired, I just wanted to reclude back to a relaxed state. So I still do my karaoke. I did, in fact, decide to do a dissertation on the African-American male warrant officer reaching the highest rank of Chief Warrant Officer 5, just like I did, because I found that it is a lonely climb. And a lot of faces like mine don't get seen. And so I interviewed 10 other faces that looked like mine, men, African-American men, and asked what were your experiences so that I didn't feel like I was alone in this. I took myself out of the loop. I only wanted to interview them. Well received. I do have a dissertation from that. It's the Ascension of African-American Warrant Officers in the Warrant Officer cohort. My dissertation chair, who didn't look like me, was so impressed. She said, I think you should do a documentary, Chief Williams. Dr. Williams now. This was in 2019. COVID happened. I had time on my hands. I thought about it. I says, can I coalesce a group of people on video and let them tell their stories instead of me documenting it on paper? Because let's not get ourselves, people aren't reading 150 to 200 page dissertations anymore. In fact, TikTok is probably the span of time that they have. And so I took on a challenge and I interviewed 11 men and women this time. And I look forward to sharing that. And these are their stories, their experiences, and I think the world will be better listening, hearing it from them.
So how long did it take you to put all that together, to interview all the veterans?
Thank you for that question. Let me first say, I spent my own money. No sponsors. I traveled across the country. So this was just not everyone meeting here at the DMV. So I traveled to Tampa, Florida, Augusta, Georgia, 4 people from the DMV, Houston, Texas, Dallas, Texas, and Los Angeles, California. That took some time. So we started January of 2022. We were on a tight schedule. A lot of the locations, my family went with me just so they can experience the process of how that looks. Brought professional crew to do the videotaping, much like we're doing here. The raw footage. I had sample questions ready for them to answer. They were already given to them. I used the dissertation blueprint to create the documentary. It was the only logical thing to do. And so I followed that blueprint, came back, had the editor do their thing, had what's called a pre-screening at the MGM National Harbor on Veterans Day of 2022. They all showed up, and I did something unprecedented. So you're familiar with the Oscars, the Grammys. I actually celebrated them by having a gala. Paid for it out of my budget. Honored them with awards and a storyteller plaque saying, hey, thank you for this project, and celebrated them. It was a black tie, red carpet event on Veterans Day of 2022. And that's part of the footage that you may have seen. Pretty proud of it.
Oh, that is amazing. That is awesome. So, as far as veteran organizations, I heard you mention that you Chief Warrant Officer groups or something like that. Could you talk a little bit about that after your service and the types of things you all do now?
Yes. So upon being WO1, which was in August 7th of 1998, I have been a continued member of the United States Warrant Officer Association every year. Having said that, I've only attended maybe 2 of their events. One was after having made W1 in 98, and the second one was at the 100th anniversary of the Warrant Officer Corps, which was in 2018. Those were monumental, obviously, but I have been a continued member. I write for the Newsliner, which I'll submit as well. They've often asked me to submit a column during the February issue of the Warrant Officer Newsliner, which speaks to African American History Month. Somehow I was selected to write about it, and so I would give a commentary of warrant officers who made an impact, of color, and did that through 2023. But I have been a member of that. I'm also a member of the Reserve Officers of America. These are reserve officers who serve in the reserve component, whether it's active duty reserve component, weekend warrior reserve component, National Guard, or just an IMA, which is an individual augmentee warrant officer or officer. You have to be an officer. For a small stint, I was also part of the ROCKS group, ROCKS. The acronym escapes me now, but it is African American officers and enlisted, and they have a spring and fall black tie affair each year to celebrate our contributions to the military. Since retiring, I haven't been as involved because the documentary took a lot of my time to create, but I look forward to showcasing it to those entities that I just mentioned. So I try to keep busy.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, every year Fort Meade has what's called a Retirement Appreciation Day. It's every October of the year. My wife went last year with us, and they celebrate all of the people in Maryland, particularly, who have retired, and they kind of celebrate us with speakers, keeping us up to date of what's new in terms of our benefits. And then we have a luncheon. They have, vendors to come and show up and provide you information about your VA benefits, your TRICARE, and those kind of things. And so I try to stay involved and showcase that to people who may not otherwise have it. And then there's just one other caveat. My church is also part of the Veterans Ministry, as they call it. I do plan to join this year, having had some time to breathe now, and I've been asked to consider it. And so they have an outreach as well. So little snippets here and there, I try to keep active and stay involved.
Awesome. Would you mind sharing the church that you attend?
I would love to. It's the First Baptist Church of Glenarden with Pastor John K. Jenkins and Lady Trina Jenkins.
Oh, I've heard of that church. Nice, very nice. How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
So everyone has their reasons for joining. My reasons, as I said, was out of necessity. But as I grew, I enjoyed the public service aspect of it. I enjoyed defending, protecting, and serving our nation. Because although the nation has its ills, it's still the greatest place on the planet. I would rather be nowhere else, bar none.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this interview?
If you are in any radius within your zip code and you feel as though there is no hope, consider the military as an option. If you join the military for however long you choose to, remember that your attitude will get you much further than your rank. If you have a great attitude, you may end up staying 5 years, 20 years, 30 years. I started out as a reservist on an 8-year contract, and I stayed for 31 years. Sometimes you choose your career, and other times your career chooses you. The Army chose me, and I think I'm better for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Is there anything else you would like to add that we haven't covered in the interview, or I didn't get a chance to ask you and you want to add to it?
Right now, the Warrant Officer Corps, particularly the numbers are a little dismal. We're trying to get more recruits in. Many people aren't aware of the Warrant Officer. They're not being told by their recruiter. A lot of their supervisors, and this is for enlisted people because you have to be enlisted in order to put your packet in. I would encourage the leaders of said group to share with them about the Warrant Officer cohort. It's a great option. The benefits are great, the pay is wonderful, but more importantly, the opportunities. If you feel that your score is not high enough, you do need a 110 GT score to be accepted, to put in your packet. But if your score is not 110, go back and take the ASVAB again. Study it, get that score up. You want to have options, as I stated before, so that when you transition out, you'll have a skill. Jobs are not as plentiful as we thought we were. Private and public alike, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. Nonprofits are not what they once were. So you always want to have something that's sustainable. Some things AI just can't replace. People still get their hair done. People still get haircuts. There's some things that still have the human touch. But whatever you do, you want to make sure that you're happy doing it. Don't chase the money, chase the purpose. Pursue your purpose and the money will come. That's whether you're military or not. But as a veteran, take advantage of the resources. Don't feel embarrassed. If you have an ache or pain that came later, go ahead and put in that application to get whatever benefits you deserve. You've earned them. They're not welfare. It's an entitlement that you've earned and you deserve. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. And finally, again, take advantage of what America has to offer. I've been in places like the Philippines. You haven't seen poor. They don't have health and human services. They eat what they kill. So when you land on this soil, you need to be grateful for what you have, because we have a lot here. That's it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us today. We truly appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.